Dr. Power, your guests have arrived.
Thank you, Bonnie Castle. Hi, folks. Come on in. There's another chair over here. Oh, good. So good to see you again. I'm glad you took time to join me again this week. Certainly, I've enjoyed last week. I have to confess that it's good and bad news. The tempo is such. You folks, I think, I've been doing this for quite a while now. You folks, I think, are the best cohorts on the frequency and number of posts, and not just short posts, but lots of meat and substance to them. So I have to say I'm absolutely delighted. And it's not just one post, but 4 or 5 of your colleagues will respond. And so that is exactly what's supposed to be happening, that we're raising the awareness, the appreciation for what's going on around us so we can craft strategies. And you folks are doing it beyond my expectations. Thank you. So that's the good news. The bad news is, along with your introductions, etc., my little feet are going just like this, trying to keep up with you and read them all and try to respond to as many as I can. So keep up the good work. I'll do my best to stay with you and say I'm quite enjoying what's happening. It's quite a success. Thank you. Long weekend coming up on Friday and Monday, so my teaching philosophy is such that your family deserves you on this Easter weekend. I do not expect to see you online Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. Save and except those folks that have to work during the week and have to do the stuff on the weekend. I'll be there. I'll zoom in and out and work with you on the weekend. But the rest of you, don't feel pressured. I'd far prefer you took time and spent some time with your partners, your spouses, your kids. They deserve a big pat on the back because you could not do this without them. It's very selfish when you take education and take papers that you're benefiting and growing and whatever, and means somebody back home is carrying 2 loads to get you where you're going. So you owe them big time, and take this weekend and enjoy it. Posts, with what's happening on the site, many of you must be overwhelmed and wondering what this is all about. And once again, I just want to underscore the importance of just 2 meaningful posts in the run of a week is all I expect. That can be responding to one of your colleagues' posts or starting a new thread. Do that if it's a topic that interests you. In fact, what I've suggested in the past and later on as we get to it, you folks have team assignments coming up on certain topics like vehicle currency. I see one thread's already started on that. There's absolutely nothing wrong if you see something in the paper, a unique little twist on the American dollar as a vehicle currency and supply demand up or down, or a debt clock or something, and want to start a thread and get some free research done by your colleagues, feel free to do that. That would be quite appropriate. So in any event, I'm enjoying it very much and what you're accomplishing. So keep at that. So what have we got in the paper today? I guess the front page of the paper today carries the historic election that the president in Nigeria, a country of about 183 million people, the average age, median age is only 17. They're youngsters for this. It's the 7th largest country in the world and 183 million. The GNP is just over $500 billion. Keep in mind Canada is over 3 times that. So it's a poor country, but nevertheless it's the 7th largest in the world. And to have a democratic election, and for the president, his name is Goodluck Jonathan, stands aside, and a retired military general is stepping in to take over as the way the election went. So more power to them. A blow for democracy. I was pleased to see it. Certainly, when I undertook my officer training, I can recall at that time we had 7 Nigerian officers in training with us, and unfortunately, when they went back, many got involved in the Civil War and many were killed. I think one became a brigadier. But it's a relationship that Canada has with Nigeria, and a lot of immigrants in Canada from Nigeria. So it's fun to watch, see what happened there. In fact, you know, and this is not to degrade the loss of our Canadian soldiers, and certainly I was one for 23 years, but if we lose 2 people, the front pages are covered with the story, and so it should be for the loss of 2. But in some African nations, like Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and places like this, in the last 2 years, they've lost 4 million people. 4 million. And not an article in the paper about it. And so it's good that we examine and understand more about the African continent and the 51 nations over there as to their coming and going. Certainly the 7th largest in the world is worth a few minutes of our time to look at, and in that sea of disruption over there, that democracy seems to have taken hold, albeit it's a very corrupt and troubling nation. It appears that democracy has got some foothold there. Another article in the paper today talks about prison head concedes mistakes in treatment of an Edward Snowshoe. He was a 24-year-old Aboriginal man from the Northwest Territories who hung himself in the prison system. And that's a symptom. If I want to talk for a few minutes about maybe a good time to bring up the prison system in Canada. It's an industry. It's an industry with social workers, with lawyers, with courts, with judges, with buildings, with infrastructure, with welfare programs, with the actual prisons themselves and the infrastructure that supports of boots and shirts and clothes and supplies, etc. It's a mammoth industry in Canada. And the question, I think, for us in Canada is, are we incarcerating too many people for marijuana and some of the lighter things? Is there another way this could be addressed? Certainly what we don't want to see, and if you did a demographic study of the folks in the prisons, you'll find it's like Edward Snowshoe. It's Indigenous folks, it's the poor folks that tend to fill the seats, and the rich folks tend to be able to move away from it. So let's talk about the inequities or equities of the penal system in Canada, the prison system, and whether or not it's an industry that maybe could be cut back and made a little more reflective of the times and the sensitivities of the times. As a sidebar to that, we're not as bad as our American cousins to the south. They've adopted, and we'll talk later in this course about public-private partnerships, P3s, and the Americans, big time. Most governments, most states have entered into public-private partnerships for the provision of these services. Well, on the face, that seems like a good thing for taxpayers' dollars, but in the clauses it says we'll keep so many of the bed spaces filled. So again, it's a business, it's an industry, so they have to fill it. And so again, you find a high majority of the blacks down there have to serve time in these institutions for crimes that maybe there could be another solution for, but it's needed to fill the bed space, or else the state has to make up the difference. And so, not sure P3s necessarily work in that regard for prison systems. But we can have a talk about the institution, would make sense, it seems to me, for this week. A survey was done, Economy Beats the Terrorism in New Poll, Economy Beats Terrorism, New Poll. And there was a good poll study given as to what the issues happen to be. And only 4% of the respondents said that fighting terrorism is more important than the economy. And so I have to, with elections coming up in this coming year, we're going to see positioning starting to take place as people jockey to get into the mind again of the electorate and position themselves well. And so we see things like the Stephen Pelosi warns this week that Canada will report atrocious growth figures for the first quarter of the year. And he says that's because of oil prices. Well, certainly oil prices played a part, there's no question of that, but I think it's only partial truth. I think as we talked last week, and we should continue to talk about the Internet of Things and its impact on, for example, retail stores and on the large box shopping malls has been dramatic. And so they're falling like leaves off a tree right now, and will continue to fall as the Internet of Things enables companies to go online and deliver their products online at the cost of those bricks and mortar stores. And so I think that's part of it. All those folks are laid off that we talk about. We talked in terms of the commodities certainly being part of it, but also in Canada, we're no longer hungry. We no longer have a fire in our belly. We no longer do enough research and development to stay innovative in this country. If you took the money we spend from the federal government towards supporting innovation, research and development in this country, and compare it to South Korea, you'll find that we're about 4 times less in what we spend out of our GMP to support innovation. Red tape, we've got growing numbers of different departments and more red tape that flies in the face of innovation and slows down entrepreneurship. And I think we said last week the 2 things that will make us great and make you great, make your companies great, make this nation great, is that we must have innovation and we must have entrepreneurship in the mind, and the rest of it get out of the way so we can let these things free and run if we're going to have our economy restore itself. But this is not happening, and as a result, our economy is looking pretty bleak for this year, according to our Bank of Canada governor, and I support that somewhat. It also mentions in here that the survey was also talking about Bill C-51. Again, the reduction of our civil liberties, the authority here for the bombing of Syria, and well, we've talked a bit about the bombing of Syria and the aspect of this. To me, we're invading a sovereign country. We don't have the legality, the legal authority to go into that country. We had the legal authority to go into Iraq. That came from the United Nations. That came from the ruling government at the time saying, please come in and help us. That makes sense. But in Syria, it's completely, in my mind, offensive that Canada is in this. But in any event, we're there. But then as strategists, we need an exit plan. What's it all about? What are the outcomes we expect? Let's suppose our C, what are they, C-17s, I think? CF-17s? Maybe the F-18s, maybe the 18s. But the point is, they're 50-year-old planes. They were around in the first Gulf War. They're like taking your old 1953, 54 MGTD into a battle. And so I admire our Canadian military, our Canadian Air Force, that are doing what they do and able to do with what they have to work with. Maybe the new CF-35s may be the answer. They've been talking about them. But my message here is that, okay, so we go into Syria, we bomb it, we're successful. Then what? We've beaten up ISIS, but that means Assad and his government are firmly in power. Is that what Canada wants? And so I don't understand, and I'm completely confused about this, and I even raise it as a false flag. I mean, often governments put up false flags to say, watch this hand, well, I hit you with this hand. And is this what's happening, that the economy really is the issue in Canada? Jobs, you know it. In Alberta, you know it, you feel it, you taste it. The gap between rich and poor, that the very wealthy are doing extremely well in this country, the 1%, the 10%. But the folks at the bottom line are finding increasingly layoffs, poor paying jobs, part-time jobs, minimum wage jobs are increasing, and that middle class folks, the blue collar, the auto worker industry we talked about last week, those jobs are disappearing. They're going to Mexico. And so rather than talk about the real issues, are we talking about things over here, Syria and that, to get our mind off the economy? And as electric vote, and as business decision makers, that's what you are. You finished this course, you've got your master's degree, you're on that part of the bell curve. You're the folks that should be making these decisions in Canada. It won't be the old farts like me. I'm coming to the end of my runway, but it's folks like you that we need to make these decisions, to be informed about it, and to speak up. You've got a job, you've got a duty to speak for those that can't and haven't had the privilege of an education. So anyway, that's enough on that today. Well, we talked last week about this new response to the IMF, this new Asian bank coming together. Over 40 countries have accepted, have joined in. Norway, Taiwan, interesting enough, have signed up. But Japan, United States, Canada didn't. We're sitting on the sidelines. And two schools of thought there. I mean, if you sit on the sidelines, you don't get a chance to be inside the tent and shape the constitution, the corporate governance of this new bank. You will take whatever you get at the end if you join later. But Canada seems to be in opposition. We'll wait, let them do their thing, get the rules and regulations for this new game of monopoly and loaning in place, and then we'll knock on the door and say we'd like to come in, but only after we've checked the human rights and corporate governance, that those sort of things are in place. Well, no right or wrong answers. There are the two approaches we could have taken. Certainly, we see this resetting of those global institutions of the World Bank, the IMF, United Nations, the Security Council, and on the list goes, of things that were done with the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 that, with the realities of the new world and the new global stage, need to be revisited. And if you're reluctant to revisit, then these new institutions will spring up. And so it's a concern. One of the things they talk about in here and why Canada put off joining was the Asian nations' policy on human rights. I want to just talk about that for a minute, because it's interesting that human rights, as we know them in this country, and as we say these are the human rights we should all value, are Canadian. It was a Canadian doctor who was working on the committee for Roosevelt's wife at the time, just after the war, during the war again, 1944, when all this was coming together, who was asked to draft what should be the human rights for the United Nations to adopt. And so he was the first one to put the draft together, and it was subsequently accepted by the committee and then implemented by the United Nations. And but it's interesting, his view of the hand wasn't completely balanced. It was the Anglo-Saxon, the Judeo-Christian values and beliefs got adopted and became the human rights standard. And so is it fair today that we take those human rights and we go to ancient civilizations like China, the Middle Kingdom, 2,500 years, it was a very center of the universe sort of nation, to go to them and pound on the chest and say, you don't have human rights. We have different stands, different views. We can't be too ethnocentric in our views. It's troubling at best to sit and think about it. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just understand the human rights that we're using are very much Western-based view of the world, and other nations may not quite have the same view, and should we have the authority to change it. I mean, keep in mind that America, Canada, if you do it on some sort of a time curve, Canada is founded in what, 1867, America 1776. 400 years worth of history is what it's taken for them to develop the standard of human rights, for their workers' compensation, for what they view as being appropriate. It's taken them 300 to 400 years to get there. China has only joined the World Trade Organization, dropped the bamboo curtain in 1978, and has become part of this new part of this new global community. And yet we say after 30 years, here's where you're supposed to be, here's where we are, join us up here in these standards. And it's only been 30 years. Is it a fair expectation that in 30 years, in less than a lifetime, they can take this 1.3 million people and reculturalize them to come up to this level? It may be our expectations are just a little too high, and if they are high, then are we cutting our nose off to spite our face on economic trade and balance to expect these Canadian human rights to be adopted by China before we'll talk to them? So it's an issue, but we could talk a bit about that. China child care benefits ballooned to $8 billion. Again, it comes in the form of tax breaks and what else? Tax breaks and tax credits and tax breaks. Again, the Harper government's going to give out. It just kicks in nicely this summer, retroactive back to January the 1st, in time for the election, that people with children in Canada will get, children at home will get a check in the mail of some size, and will put them in a good mood for the election. It's interesting, only 40% of it will go to households with children under 13 and have child care expenses. The other 50% just goes to families that have children at home up to 18 and no child care expenses, but they'll still get the same check. And so we can look at that, but I guess given the options, we could also do quantitative easing in Canada and do what Americans did and give it to the banks and hope that it will flow down to these folks that have to pay child care expenses. But it may be a better form of quantitative easing. So we could talk a bit about that. Is it better for the economy to give a handout to citizens at the ground level, that it will go out and stimulate expenses and pay for child care centers and put dollars into the economy, as opposed to give it to the banks, as the Americans did, and it didn't really have that trickle down promise. Oh yeah, the nuclear talks in Iran. I'm recording this on a Wednesday, so things may have happened the time you view it, but at this point it has broken down. The six powers have missed their deadline, and the U.S. threatens to walk. And we can talk some more about Iran, maybe we'll on the line, but you've got to be careful what you wish for, and we'll talk a bit about the demand-supply curve for oil. Understand Iran, if you lift the sanctions, has the capacity to put another 1 million barrels a day of oil into the pipelines at a time when we have a glut. So there's lots of strings and implications here to accepting an Iran deal right now and lifting the sanctions. We'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. I was very pleased with this. As an old vet, let me get my glasses so I can read this thing. I was pleased to see, and in this class the Irish do very well, you will find out. Erin O'Toole, our new Minister of Veteran Affairs, I love the name, has just introduced a new $70,000 death benefit that goes in a lump sum payment to top up military personnel who are injured, severely injured, or disabled in war-related events. And so that comes on the top of 2006, the new Veterans Charter that came out. So I give Harper full credit here, and I give Erin O'Toole full credit for at least doing something proper to honor our servicemen. And that's not a lot of money if you lose your legs to get an extra $70,000, but it's a start. So well done, a kudo to the Harper government and to our Minister of Veteran Affairs. Well done. Well, let's talk about the oil. See, the oil isn't here, a report. The oil output gushes despite the price gap. And we have to look at this whole thing. I mean, there are different levels. If you go to Saudi Arabia, they practically take a straw, put it in the sand, and get sweet crude, and their cost is something like $20, $24 a barrel in that range. If you go to our tar sands, for a very hard job to get and slugging to get it out, about $70 a barrel may be the figure that you need. And different in-between numbers. The point is, when you get down to the $47 a barrel, as it is today, you are marginal at best, and in most cases you're losing, and so the oil industry, for those that produce at this level and higher, it's collapsing. And it doesn't look any brighter because this article here talks in terms of the OPEC countries are picking up the tempo and pushing out more. At the same time, Canada's pushing out more, and America, because of fracking, that idea of putting a straw down on the ground and pumping chemicals and water in and sluicing out the stiff oil and then sucking it up, has given America a great deal of oil to make them self-sufficient and also into an exporting nation of some size. And so we have this demand-supply curve, roughly 95 million barrels a day versus 94 million barrels a day versus 94 million barrels. It's a very tight balance, and it's just about balance, but there's more stuff coming online daily that we don't need, particularly if Iran throws another million barrels into the mix because sanctions are lifted. It won't happen right away. It'll take them a while to ramp up and get this, so it's not overnight light switch, but they'll have the capacity to increase the supply. And they have to, because Saudi has got so much dependent, that's all it has for its revenue income and commitments, that even though it can produce for $24 a barrel, it needs a lot more barrels produced to have the same revenue stream that they are. So the Saudis take the position that we're not going to be the only ones to cut. We've done it in the past, or the OPEC, we're not going to be the only ones to cut, but Canada, America, Nigeria, other nations who also have to feel the pain and roll back their production levels a little bit. And so we have in the mainstream media in America and Canada finger pointing at OPEC as the villain in this thing, but in a fair and balanced way, that's not the case. All nations are producing more to make up for the deficiency with the dropping price, and the result is we're storing it in national security salt mines in the ground, 90 days supply in America. We're putting in the back of tankers that are sitting out off Vancouver waiting to be offloaded, and the pipeline is just about stocked. There's no more room for it, and yet the numbers are still pumping out. And so the price of oil should drop. It should drop lower. It may drop to the high 30s, which just compounds the problem. What else? I see the wireless carriers in Canada. Interesting story here about the in June there's a deadline that they're going to have to readjust their contracts with respect to penalties and getting out clauses. So there's going to be a lot of folks knowing now what they can what better deals they can acquire, and they're going to be looking for that. So you're going to see a lot of competition in the market, and that's not a bad thing. Competition is good for consumers, and will help them adjust their prices and stop maybe gouging a little bit. Retired CIBC executives earn an extra $25 million. Two folks, they got $25 million between them after their post-employment arrangements for leaving the bank. And recall banks, as I understand banks, and maybe some of you are in the credit union and others, my perception is I see a lot of frontline tellers who are part-time workers, primarily women, working for not much over minimum wage at a time when banks earn an extra $25 million for the CEO executives. There's something wrong here with this trajectory between, as we talked about, the very rich in this country, and I'm not going to call them poor, because certainly they're doing a little better than they were, maybe not marginally, but the gap, the trajectory is getting farther apart. The middle the middle ground is collapsing. Is it appropriate that executives receive an extra $25 million at a time when you have part-time tellers, mostly women, struggling to make ends meet? I'm not looking for a socialism here, but I'm looking for corporate governance, and I think that doesn't seem to be appropriate. Oh, CDP deadline in Canada. Well, we talked a bit about that. Stephen Pelosi already talked about the GMP falling in Canada and going to be atrocious, maybe flat. And it doesn't take much to go from flat to deflation in Canada, where the cost of your house, your car, and all this stuff starts to drop. Your condominium and things starts to drop. And so that's a possibility. In BC, we have a workers' immigration program in Canada, largely taken care of now by the provinces. And the idea behind it was that there are certain trades and professions we don't have enough of in Canada as we open up. In Alberta, during the good times of a year or so ago, before the oil price dropped, we're bringing in people from Russia to work on the oil rigs because we couldn't find enough oil workers. That made sense. In BC, we had mines in the northern part of BC that we couldn't get miners in to go down in the mines and dig out coal, and so the Chinese said, we'll bring in some Chinese workers and make them miners and put up there. But it got abused. We had McDonald's here in Victoria said we need some foreign workers too to help bring down the price, minimum wage, to pass out hamburgers. At a time you're stepping over people on the streets who are unemployed looking for work. And so they have put a freeze on this immigration situation in BC right now, saying that immigration program is going to stop because we need for a chance to rethink this thing. Certainly, in my mind, immigration makes sense. When you have situations like Alberta at the time that it was peaking and needed workers, then we have to have immigrants. We have to bring in from Russia and other places. But when you have communities that have high unemployment and not enough work to go around, that strikes me as being the inappropriate time to do immigration and bring in workers. But having said that, let me say that we need immigrants in Canada. If we're going to keep our social safety net where it is, we have to bring in about 250 to 300,000 new immigrants a year, talented folks who can pay taxes and support old farts like me and our pension plans to make that happen. So we can't see immigration fall off. We also have to understand that immigrants have choices. Canada's not the only game in town. They have a choice. Somebody talented, those PhDs coming from India, have a number of nations that they can go to with their attributes, with their competencies. And so as Canada will learn that it's very much a competitive market out there. And there's also a competitive advantage. One of the beauties of Canada is that we have that mosaic. We have the talent. We have the immigrants in Canada of almost every culture, that if I need to go into India, a very large, over a billion person nation, vibrant, growing, the marvelous thing, I can go to Surrey and I can link up there with the Indo-Canadians of a large set of talents with that Rolodex back in India, who can show us the ways, the customs. Sun Tzu says when you want to go into local foreign lands, use local guides. We have that richness that we can take those folks and partner with them to help us exploit the opportunities that exist in India. If I want to go to Asia, I just have to go to Richmond. The Chinese population there, the Asian population is booming. Chinese Businessmen's Association on Richmond Road is booming. And so anybody in business like you folks that want to get into the game quickly and find local guides, Canada is rich in that. If you went to a country like Japan, it's not. It's very sort of homogeneous, just sort of one size fits all, and they don't have that luxury. So it's a richness that we do need immigration, but we have to find the appropriate balance here between put them in the right bums and the right seats on the bus and not in the other seats on the bus that will cause grief to those who are stepping over on the streets. But certainly there is more unemployment coming our way in Canada based on the economy, based on the global economy. It's all getting soft around the world. Some signs, some sparks of life. Maybe France is starting to come up a little bit, but you can tell by our commodities. Look at the price of gold and other things. It's people just aren't buying it. They don't need it, which means manufacturing is not taking place. And so the global economy is soft. And I have to say that with respect to our American friends in the South, they'll tell us that all is well down there and it's about to explode and great things. But if you look at that debt clock as to look last week and look at the unemployment and those that, even though they're not shown as unemployed, nevertheless are unemployed, if you look at the jobs that are being produced, they're not blue-collar jobs like you have in the auto industry that are hemorrhaging out of Canada and out of the States to Mexico. They're the part-time jobs. In fact, people need 2 of these part-time jobs to make a living, and 2 part-time jobs then shows less unemployment on their stats. So I'm not convinced yet that all is entirely well down there, but we'll continue to watch it. But certainly the Internet of Things is making jobs disappear unless you've got that knowledge-based sort of capacity. Certainly Canada has to be a knowledge-based country, and without that we continue to fall farther and farther behind. Well, I think that's probably enough for this week to get over. I hope you're enjoying the course. I really am enjoying it. I encourage you to call just to say hello when you get time to do that. I'm there for you, and I'll do my best to keep pace, but you guys are setting a torrid pace, and well done with that. I'm pleased and proud of you. Talk next week. Bye-bye now.